Hello and welcome to our channel, MarshStream, your public performance broadcast platform. Please make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. You can also donate to our tip jar and support the arts and artists of MarshStream by clicking the link below in the description. Check out our website, themarsh.org, for all upcoming live performances. Now, enjoy the show.
Good evening, everyone. We'll get to how to kill a Filipino in a bit. But first, my name is Emil Guillermo. Yeah, Emil, like not email. Guillermo, Gil, like fish Gil, Guillermo. More on that later, too. Amok is my middle name. It's one of the few Filipino words in the English dictionary. Though in general, the definition to be Filipino in America means to be royally screwed. Ask the Filipino veterans of World War II, promised citizenship and then denied for over 50 years. I'm just a font of bad history. Amok means to be thrust into a murderous frenzy. I like that word, but don't worry, I just mean it metaphorically, which doesn't exactly mean I'm joking. There's always a double meaning. I'm just saying I'm not responsible if a joke kills, only if it dies. Besides, I'm a journalist, a professional observer, which means I see, feel, and hear, then report back. It's like I'm doing the play-by-play. Hey, look, I got my play-by-play hat on of my American Filipino life. We're here courtside, and all the short Filipinos are on the court now. Unbelievable. On Zoom, from a closet Filipino, well, with Filipino gongs, which are not gongs really, but the eyes of all Filipinos who ever came to America. I speak for them. They're my audience, my witnesses, my eyes. Truly, the first Filipinos to arrive carried those gongs and were brought to the U.S. with purpose. They held not just gongs, but spears, because they were headhunters, entertainers, but headhunters. Can you see yourself at the 1904 World's Fair at the Judy Garland Meet Me in St. Louis World's Fair? Only for the Filipinos, it was more like the Dog Meet Me in St. Louis. 1,700 Filipinos were brought here to be put on display. Human zoos. To help whites sell the American imperialization of the Philippines. They made a big deal about eating dog. I don't know. The Filipinos knew you only have dog on special occasions, and the celebration of your impending colonization is not one of them. But just like England, America felt deserving of its own colony. They just say, just look at the Filipinos. Look, they're just like us. We're just like them. Emil, which us am I? It was 1904, pre-woke. A year later, my father was born under the American flag in the far north of the Philippines. By 1928, he came to America, colonized American Filipino, emphasis American. July 11th, it was my dad's lucky day, 7/11. This is how he saw it from the boat. 7/11, 1928, steamship. Cost $60, 30 days on the USS Franklin Pierce. My suit, my one good suit, and I come to America. The US raped the Philippines and left us for dead, but I come here to seek my fortune. I want my democracy direct, intravenously. There were yellow cabs in San Francisco at the docks. It'd take most of them to the fields in Stockton where they could work for 10 cents an hour. My father would not go. I'm not going to Stockton. I stay in San Francisco, here to cook the vegetables. I am here to cook the vegetables, not pick the vegetables. In Stockton, they have signs on the door that say, no Filipinos allowed. Get that? No Filipinos allowed on some doors. Yeah. They have lynchings of Filipinos. In San Francisco, I get lost in the fog. And if they see me, they just call me monkey. There was restaurant work, but it was the Depression. Easy. I mean, there were a few jobs, but they could dress up with that one suit, and the white women loved the Filipinos. Oh, the white women loved the Filipinos. Well, there were a few Filipinos Filipino women. No purifications, no immaculatas, no conceptions. Just Miss Jones, Miss Smith, miscegenation. Oh, miscegenation. It means to mix. Anti-miscegenation laws kept Filipinos forever bachelors. The jealousies between Filipino men and white men spurred anti-Filipino riots. Furman Tabera was our Emmett Till, shot and killed for being with a white woman. Watsonville, 1930. The politics got nasty and xenophobic. The Tidings McDuffie Act changed their status back from colonized Americans to aliens, like Martians. No longer American nationals. Now Filipinos were aliens asked to self-deport. Indignity of indignities. My dad was like most Filipinos. He kept their heads down. Maybe they won't see us. They endured the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s on the fringe. More Filipino women came after the war, and then I was born, and life began for my father. It was like he'd been living under a rock until he had a chance to be a dad and a grandpa all rolled into one and find his real treasure, his own American Filipino family. That means me. I'm kind of a miracle, you know. By now, you know, I'm not nothing. I'm not something, but I'm not nothing. I have a small piece of American media history. I was one of the first group of Asian Americans to be on TV, on the news, and not as a victim. I was on Channel 4 when it was good here in San Francisco, you know, the Peacock, and I had my pre-Bruno Mars perm. Ooh, life was good. A TV reporter. People would stop me on the streets, not just at ceremony, all over. They would see me, a Filipino and Asian, and they'd say, "Oh, Emil, you are so much bigger than my 19 inches TV." Oh, yeah, that was the size of the average TV back then. This is before cell phones, social media, before all that. There was just 3 channels. I was local TV famous. But then just like that, last hired, first fired, I found myself out of a job. It was Christmas week, 1988. The mortgage is due. My wife is about to have a baby. And me, I'm sending out resumes everywhere. I'm sitting under the Christmas tree on the coffee table, typing out resume letters. And then I get a call. It's the vice president of news at NPR, Adam Clayton Powell III. The third, so nice they named him thrice. He'd seen my coverage of the Marcos dictatorship on the news. "You should be an NPR host," he said. I can be a host, not a parasite? And not to brag, but no one else wants to talk about it. I became host of All Things Considered, the first Asian American to host NPR's flagship show, the first Asian American male to host a national news program, the first Asian American, that would be Connie Chung, who hosted the CBS Evening News. I guess that makes me the male Connie Chung. It was my Jackie Robinson moment, albeit in radio, where all I had to do was sound white. I didn't have white privilege. I had white voice privilege, which doesn't get you very far. So I was the first Filipino host, not parasite. And I got witnesses. I did some good stories at NPR, but it wasn't easy. There was always a sense that you didn't belong, even if they had your picture hanging on the lobby. Still, I had a responsibility to sneak in some Filipino stories. I didn't cover, say, Lapu-Lapu slaying Magellan. NPR wasn't around in 1521. But I did the story of Manuel Fragante, who sued the city of Honolulu to fight accent discrimination. It went all the way to the Supreme Court. NPR didn't want me to do that story until the New York Times did. But I knew something was wrong when I showed up for the 20th anniversary of NPR, NPR's big celebration. I thought they'd want to make a big deal of the diversity of their hosts. I was the only minority host at the time, but no one wanted to celebrate my new lack of invisibility. Indeed, they sort of honored my invisibility. They ignored me. I never felt more invisible. I should have known when I went to Union Station for the party, all dressed up in my tux, and some thought I was there to work the event as a waiter. I was in NPR for 2 years. My final story was an essay about my name. Oh, there's that name again. You'll notice I say my name Guillermo. The double L is L-Y, Guillermo, not Guillermo. That's Spanish colonial, and I spit on the colonizers. The Filipinos say Guillermo. Gills, fish gotta breathe. So I said Guillermo, and they said Guillermo, and we called the whole thing off. 30 years ago this year. I look back. The best journalism I did actually was in the ethnic media, but it was at NPR I talked to the most people. I was one of the first to push open that door in the media that says no Filipinos allowed 30 years ago. A small act of history. That's all right. I have you on Zoom now, and we have the witnesses. They know I was there. I held the door open as long as I could. I began writing my Emil column more than 25 years ago. Now it's at the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund website. It's been a slow bloodletting. And the best end up as part of these shows, my Amok Monologues. One morning, 7 years ago, I was at my kitchen table looking for a topic, and then it found me. I got this call that Stefan was dead. Stefan Guillermo, then 26, my first cousin once removed, was removed, shot, murdered in his apartment building early one Saturday morning after a night on the town with friends in San Francisco. I could see his face now. I got this picture of him. You know, he's a good-looking guy. You know, he's a Guillermo. He's got the Giants eye black. He's at the baseball game, the SF under his eyes. He's got his Tim Lincecum 55 jersey on. He's smiling. Hey, look, there's no crime being drunk if you're responsible enough not to drive. But he made a fatal error that night. Stefan lived on the 5th floor. He got off on the 3rd. When he couldn't get into the identical apartment on a different floor, a resident tenant, a 68-year-old retired security guard, shot him. The only witness was the shooter, who turned himself in and was arrested for suspicion of murder. For 3 days, they held him, and then they let him go. California's version of the stand your ground law allowed the killer to be set free. There's no murder mystery here. The mystery is the law that allows the mistaken shooter to go free and my cousin to be killed legally. How do you kill a Filipino? Easily. The only thing I could do was speak out. On the day the San Francisco Board of Supervisors commemorated Asian Pacific American Heritage Month, May, I prepared a talk but was limited in time, and here's what I was going to say, and why May as Heritage Month will never be the same for me ever again. Mr. President and members of the board, thank you for this opportunity to speak. I am Emil Guillermo, native San Franciscan, proud Lowell High graduate who has lived in every supervisorial district at one time in my life. My father, Willie Guillermo, was a piece of Asian American history in San Francisco, one of the first to come to America from the Philippines in the 20s. He lived in the city and endured the racism of the times as a young man. He lived in the Tenderloin, the South of Market, the Fillmore. It was not the time of the high-tech boom, but the low-tech reality. He lived when it was illegal for Filipinos to marry whites, own property, become citizens. They were often called monkeys. It was the era of Little Brown Brother. So it's ironic today to speak in these chambers about his grandnephew, Stefan Guillermo, my first cousin once removed, who was shot and murdered in his apartment building May 3rd, 2014. I'm here with family members to urge the supervisors to support justice for Stefan. I met Stefan when he was 8, a legal immigrant from the Philippines, now 26. He was to graduate this June from San Francisco State after working 2 jobs and being forced into the role his family had when his father died from health issues several years ago. He took care of his younger brother, his sister, his mother. They all lived in a small Mission Street apartment. Stefan, now dead, but his self-confessed killer, The gunman who turned himself in is now held under arrest and may soon be free. If that happens, it would be a travesty. I want the San Francisco PD and the DA simply to do their jobs, gather the facts, and make the case against the murderer. The DA has enough to charge the killer for murder now. This is the case that the city and county of San Francisco should use to challenge the version of stand your ground. That law exists in California, the castle doctrine. That idea of protecting one's castle is too often used, I believe wrongly, to justify deadly force in the state. But it still is based on what a reasonable man would do. In the case of Stephen Guillermo, who after a night on the town returned home, his fatal mistake was getting off on the wrong floor of his apartment building. Instead of the 5th floor, he went to the 3rd. What happens from there is a matter of police work and fact-finding. Do your jobs. When fact is undisputed, the gunman shot and killed Stephen by mistake. And what would a reasonable man do? A reasonable man does not hear a neighbor knocking on the door and then shoots him. Stephen was not an intruder. How did Stephen enter the apartment? Was he let in? He was inside. A reasonable man does not believe he's in danger when he sees Stephen Guillermo, a small, unarmed, and nonviolent person. A reasonable man does not shoot first and answer questions later. Indeed, why does a reasonable man in San Francisco even have a need for a gun? To protect himself from Stephen Guillermo? The gunman must be charged with murder in order to explain his actions. The DA cannot simply presume that the shooter had a reasonable fear of imminent peril of death or great bodily injury to self. That's the presumption. That's in the law. We shouldn't make it easy for people to use guns impulsively without consequences, even if they might be afraid of something. The gunman must be held accountable for his actions. A presumption that one is in fear can still be questioned in court. It can, especially if the presumption is wrong. A single shot killed Stephen Guillermo. If Stephen Guillermo's killer is set free by the DA, then the police and the DA have not just failed Stephen and his family and friends. The SFPD and the DA and the law have failed the people. I would urge this political body, the Board of Supervisors, to take action to support Stephen Guillermo's quest for justice. Oh, they were all too scared to argue against that legal presumption that defends the shooter, as if it were the truth. It wasn't. Someone had to speak for the dead. Family members and I stood outside the Hall of Justice for a week. We held up makeshift signs, justice for Stephen. The DAs said they saw us from their windows. They were hiding, but we got nothing. Months later, I finally got to meet the DA in person, George Gascon, who had aspirations for higher office, like mayor, perhaps. He was out to change the drug laws, remember? Great, for justice. For justice? Or for the votes? I asked him, what about my cousin's murder, George? This is what he said. Your cousin is just one man. Just one man. Oh, sure. I guess if he was worth 1 million votes, it would be different. I guess if it wasn't one poor person of color killing another poor person of color, if it involved someone famous or white or a cop, maybe it would rise to a level where someone cared. 7 years later, Gascon is out of the city, out of the county. He's in LA, the DA there. He's a Dodger fan. The killer is free. Stephen's still dead. His cold case, deader. Still no justice. All we got was a story to tell and tell again so we never forget it, so that we may learn from it. For a murdered Filipino so easily gunned down, a story is all we got. And so we repeat the story so we don't repeat history. Stephen was buried in his 1955 Linscomb jersey. That month, May 2014, the Giants were going for their third championship. On Filipino American Heritage Night, it was the bottom of the third. Linscomb was pitching. Then on the big scoreboard was Stefan's electronic tombstone, his smiling face and the words, Stefan Guillermo, 1987 to 2014, American Filipino, Giants fan taken too soon. 7 years later, the score is still the same. But I have a hunch. The eyes know the truth. They saw it all. From my dad to me to Stefan. It's the inherited legacy of our invisibility. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emil, for that wonderful performance. Now let's welcome our next performer, Mary Powelson.
April 2020. She died in 2009, and my mom's stuff is still in my basement next to my dad's stuff, which arrived 3 years before hers. My brother's stuff, which showed up a few months before hers. And even stuff of my ex-husband's, shoved next to the back door, boxes of rocks, remained a dusty reminder that all the death that preceded our divorce was not the end all, but the be all. Before now, it was easy to ignore my basement because I was never home, and frankly, everything smells forgotten. Boxes, books, costumes, paper, stories, paper, pictures, paper, tax returns, greeting cards, paper, baby socks, paper, scripts, plays, love letters, death certificates, rocks, really, rocks. Pictures of people I don't even know, money, court orders, fake swords, and paper. But now all this stuff has to go and things have to be clean because I need somewhere to put more relevant stuff like jars of peanut butter, cans of pinto beans, tomatoes, cat food, way too much pasta, not enough bleach, and bulk paper products that are as exhausting to talk about as they are to find. And now I'm unemployed. Unless you count driving my roommate to and from his shop in the Mission, the payment of which is a safer bubble. Twice a day, the back way, up Lincoln, over the hill to Roosevelt, to 14th, past Sanchez, past Noe, past shady trees, homeless camps, and ghosts. Ghosts. I'm reading Hamlet out loud, online, 3 different groups, cohorts, 3 different ages, middle schoolers that I recently taught, high schoolers I used to teach, and my people, old friends. Upon lockdown and termination in March, I proclaimed to anyone who would listen what needed to be done now was to read Hamlet. And 29 people agreed, some of them even adults. One of my 12-year-olds constantly changed her filters, surprising, reflecting the evolving tone and action of the play, usually bathing her video tile in blood. Around Act 4 somewhere, she changed her Zoom name to Hell Yawning Contagion. I've pulled many quotes from Hamlet, but never yet Hell Yawning Contagion, and it's there. I prefer there is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. It's the first Friday in April, and I'm waiting for a 9 o'clock call from a man I met on Match. I didn't really meet him. I recognized him from childhood. He lived across the street from me in Colma, a suburb known for its windy fog and abundance of cemeteries. My hometown is where San Francisco keeps its dead. His younger sister was my best friend until 5th grade. And though my Match filter should have never, ever sent him to me, his listed politics were moderate and he had no kids, I was curious, so I swiped right. We connected and we made a phone date to talk for the first time in 50 years or ever, because what little girl ever wants to speak to her best friend's older brother, especially when he's cute? So to avoid thinking thoughts, good and bad, I bide my time by cleaning the basement. And I'm sure I'm the only person on the planet in April 2020 cleaning out their basement. Out of this decomposing box follows yellowed newspaper, ripped in half, torn with age, but originally folded and tucked somewhere neatly between black, heavy paper, the skeletal tissue of an old brown scrapbook, 75 years old, almost to the day. The front side, woman's body examined for rare poison, Hamlet. The other side, a full page obituary, President Roosevelt, Hamlet. FDR's death is both an easy distraction and a worrisome wonder, because where would we be on April 4th, 2020, with a president like Roosevelt instead of that like Hoover? Worse than Hoover, much worse. Sometimes I read a story, first page, last page, then go back and go all the way through just to see how the dots connect from beginning to end. So on this first page, Happy Easter, your classmates, 1945, in perfect Palmer handwriting. And on the last page, FDR. And the middle, oh, never mind. The phone rings and it's him with immediate ease. As though we had talked that morning, he and I talk about our day, comparing respective basement plumbing problems, strangers in our houses. The next 2 hours, we jump in and out of each other's timelines, comparing our lives in LA. I was an actress, he dated an actress. We giggled about childhood. Not all of it was funny. And the current chaos, and some of it is funny. I tell him things I rarely tell people. And he tells me about his father who just died, Hamlet. And I send him a 1968 picture of his parents. I found that in a shoebox. We like talking to each other. And we text that. It is a Good Friday. My mom and I always talked a lot, but we didn't tell each other much. I knew my mom had TB as a kid. I got TB tests as a kid. I knew my mom had a good friend who died of polio, bad vaccine. I knew my mom wanted me to go to church. I didn't. I knew my mom worried too much about things. I couldn't cross the Golden Gate Bridge on prom night. I knew it angered her when I challenged Catholicism. Once I referred to her beliefs and her religion as myths. She was furious. When I was 6, I knew not to tell my mom that the school bus driver asked me to stay on the bus after the other kids left so he could give me a present. It wasn't a good present. I didn't know how desperately my mom wanted me to be hers. At age 8, halfway through an underwater swim test, I pulled myself upside of the pool to catch a breath, and my mom, I saw her quickly jumping from the bleachers, meeting me at the edge and comforting me. And she said, "That's all right. You're not strong. You're like me." But I am strong. I'm just coming up for air. When I was 30, my aunt decided that I needed to know something about my mother. My mom and I had grown apart, and my aunt thought if I understood what my mom had lived through, I might just uncover patience and find a little compassion. So my aunt told me this, minus all the parentheticals. In 1943, the landlord subdivided the family flat on Henry and Sanchez. A man moved into what was once their living room. He had a bad cough. Stop thinking about coughs. In January 1944, in the middle of her 5th grade year, my mother got tuberculosis. She was hospitalized, isolated with strangers in the TB ward of San Francisco General until 1949. A little girl, 5 years in lockdown. Think on that. Sundays were visitors' days. She could see one parent, usually her mom, in the ward, and the rest stayed outside in the lot below. Mom saw them through a window, several floors up, social distancing. And after 6 years, she moved back home. In 1950, she returned to school. In 1950, she returned to school for the first time. She had a part in her senior class play. I found the program in some box. My mother watched me on stage for 40 years, and never once did she ever mention to me that she was ever in a play. She attended Lone Mountain College, worked in an office, and in 1954 relapsed. Diseases come back. Mom was hospitalized again for 18 months, this time at Arequipa, a TB sanitorium in a small woodsy canyon right across on the back of Mount Tam, across the Golden Gate Bridge. Her father took the Greyhound bus to visit on Sundays, and the rest of them stayed home. I went to Arequipa twice, once as a Girl Scout and once as a teacher. Both times my mom commented, "Oh, I've been there." Mom's second round of TB demanded invasive treatment. Several ribs were removed, her diseased lung was collapsed, and she was left with one good lung. And a scythe-like scar on her back, stretching from shoulder to waist. I stared at it when I was a kid. I never asked. A scar that embarrassed her when wearing dresses. Her sister covered it with makeup. A scar that disinherited and disheartened her about marriage. There is a story there. A scar that warned her about pregnancy. Learning she was getting married, her doctor advised Mom against rushing to have children. It was too risky. But doctor, we're Catholic, she told him. When I was about 30, my therapist thought it might be the right time to tell my mom that I was molested on my 6th birthday. So, in session, I told her, like a reporter. Silence, mostly. I made my mother cry. What now? Said I won't tell anyone, said my mother. Oh, good, said me. My therapist leaned in, saying firmly, I think family secrets suck. Mom's eyes widened. Oh, so do I. March 1944, a Sunday. During her mother's weekly visit to San Francisco General, my mom would wave to her father and sisters below, and waving to her 3 sisters from the SF General Ward window was this Sunday ritual. And on this day in 1944, she noticed that one sister was missing. Where's Carol? She asked. And every week, she kept asking. And every week, her mother kept explaining, Carol stayed home, Carol's with aunties, Carol is on Grandpa's farm in Sonoma. My mother learned to stop asking. One week, much later, as she was waking up from her nap, she could make out the sound of her mother's voice as she talked to another mother. The moms did that while their daughters slept in the ward. How many children do you have, Eileen? She heard someone say. 4, but 1 died. She heard her mother reply. That's how my mother found out her sister was dead. She said nothing to her mom. Not then, not ever. Why not? I demanded. It was easy to demand things of my mother in the safety of a therapist's office. Because I just didn't want to make my mother cry. 5 years later, in 1949, Mom was released and returned home to meet 2 new siblings, her youngest sister, age 4, and her baby brother, age 2. No one ever mentioned Carol. In 1951, when she was 18, Mom finally asked her younger sister what had happened to Carol. She learned this one Friday. Her sister, Carol, was lagging behind her older sisters as they marched up 17th Street from school. Her nose was bleeding. By that Sunday, she was dead. meningitis brought on by tuberculosis. The whole family tested positive for TB and remained positive for the rest of their lives. No one else ever got sick. The scrapbook. Since that Friday night, I never bothered to look inside, assuming it was merely full of children's handmade cards to an ill classmate, because teachers like to do that kind of stuff. Make a card, draw a picture. No, Johnny, you don't need scissors. So I'm thinking of tossing this because, but I hesitate because last week I found $80 in a greeting card, 420s, germ-free. So I open the scrapbook. I go to the first page. Happy Easter, your classmates, 1945. I go to the last page. A president with polio who loved his country above all else and labored in its service with utter disregard of his own well-being, of his own comforts and conveniences of life itself. So I go to the middle. 4 pages of faded sepia tone photos, neatly placed. Steel bunk beds in a row, large paned windows, sun pouring in hot and light, casting shadows which placed little girls behind bars. White gowns, white pinafores, holding on, holding hands, holding up. Classmates. And I find her. She's standing behind a little girl, her pointy chin, her long black braids falling off her shoulder, that smile, her arms wrapped around the shoulders of a little girl 2 or 3 years younger than her, just like a sister. I text these images to her sisters, those that are still alive, and they had never seen them. They never even knew these photos existed. Well, she knew they would make me cry, my aunt says. My mother saved her sanitarium self in a scrapbook, stored behind shoes in the back of all her closets, in all her homes, no light to reveal, no air to diminish their weight, keeping them submerged. My mother had 4 children, but 1 died. Every year when she went in for her chest x-ray, my mom made her younger sister promise to take care of us if the news was bad. And that scar story that she never told me. After she first got engaged, my mother told my father she was worried about getting married. She didn't want him to see her scar. It became an issue. And one night in a car, my dad reached over, pulled up the back of her sweater quickly, but gently pulled it down again and said, "There, I saw it. Now we don't have to talk about it anymore." Beverly married Donald and got pregnant immediately, despite her doctor's concerns about respiratory failure. Since her relapse, she had been receiving monthly air injections. Pregnancy was a risk, but she was young, in love, married, Catholic. It was the 60s. There was now a polio vaccine, and an Irish Democrat was running for president. It turned out Mom didn't need injected air. She could breathe just fine. Inside her, I held up her lungs. "It's all right," I say. "You are strong, like me." Since that Friday in April, I've chatted more than a few times with my childhood best friend's older brother. Okay, his name is Tony. He says we should meet up when the smoke clears. He makes me laugh. I tell him things. I tell him that my friend stopped by on my 59th birthday. I tell him that I stayed at the top of the stairs and they stayed at the bottom in masks. "Why?" Tony asks me. "Because I'm Doc," I say. "You're overthinking this," he says. He may be right. Thank you.